Today, we reveal the shocking truth about the UK's most popular bread. The loaf sitting in millions of British kitchens right now. The one you've trusted for years. The one your parents bought. The one that's become so normal, so everyday, so unremarkable that you've never stopped to question what's actually inside it. For decades, the British public reached for the same brands without thinking. We bought what was familiar, what was advertised during our favourite television programmes. What came in the red, white and blue packaging that felt quintessentially British. We assumed that popularity meant quality, that if millions of families were buying it, it must be safe, wholesome, trustworthy. But popularity doesn't equal purity. Market dominance doesn't guarantee nutrition. And the most recognised name on the shelf isn't necessarily the one you should be putting in your children's lunchboxes. Because the bread that built Britain, the real stuff our grandparents ate, has been quietly replaced with something else entirely. An industrial product so heavily modified, so artificially enhanced, so chemically dependent, that calling it bread is starting to feel like a courtesy rather than a fact. The media advertised it. Doctors never questioned it. And for generations, we believed it was just bread. Because bread used to mean something. 4 ingredients: flour, water, yeast, salt. Simple, honest, real. But walk down any British supermarket aisle today and try to find a loaf with just those 4 ingredients. You'll struggle. Because what dominates the shelves now, what's labelled as Britain's favourite, what's marketed as the nation's choice, is something fundamentally different. Firstly, we have Warburton's, the brand that's everywhere, the loaf that's in more British homes than any other. The name's synonymous with British bread itself. Specifically, their white toasty loaf, the thick sliced version that's become the default choice for millions of families across the country. If you ask most people what Britain's most popular bread is, they'll say Warburton's without hesitation. And they'd be right. Warburton's commands nearly a quarter of the entire UK bread market. That's hundreds of millions of loaves sold every single year. A dominance so complete that in many households the word Warburton's has become interchangeable with the word bread itself. They've built an empire on heritage, on Britishness, on family values. The advertising shows wholesome scenes, happy families, traditional imagery. They position themselves as the brand that's been there for generations. The one you can trust, the one that feels like home. But peel back that nostalgic packaging and look at what you're actually buying. Look at the ingredient list on a Warburton's toasty loaf. This isn't your grandmother's bread. This isn't the loaf Britain was built on. This is modern industrial bread in its purest, most refined, most engineered form. Wheat flour fortified with calcium, iron, niacin, thiamine. Already, we're not talking about natural flour. We're talking about flour that's been stripped down and then had synthetic vitamins added back because the processing removed everything nutritious in the first place. Then comes water, yeast, fine. But then the list continues. Vegetable oils, including rapeseed oil. Seed oils, the very oils your body struggles to process. The ones linked to inflammation. The ones that didn't exist in human diets until the Industrial Revolution made them cheap enough to mass produce. Salt, sugar, soya flour. Why is there soya in bread? Emulsifiers, including E472E and E471, E481, E472E. These aren't ingredients. These are laboratory codes. Dough conditioner, calcium propionate, flour treatment agent, ascorbic acid. And that's not even the complete list. This is what Britain's most popular bread looks like when you strip away the marketing. A heavily processed, chemically enhanced, industrially optimized product, designed not for nutrition, not for nourishment, not for your health, but for softness, shelf life, uniformity, and profit margins. And here's what they don't tell you. Warburton's wasn't always like this. Go back far enough, decades back, and Warburton's actually made proper bread. Real bread. Bread that went stale after a day because it was alive. Bread with a handful of ingredients your great-grandparents would recognize. Bread that didn't need a degree in chemistry to understand. But somewhere along the way, as the company grew, as the demand increased, as the pressure to compete with industrial giants intensified, the recipe changed. The ingredients expanded. The process became mechanized. And what emerged wasn't an evolution of bread. It was a replacement of it. Yet the branding stayed the same. The family imagery remained. The nostalgic appeal persisted. And millions of people continued buying it, assuming that the Warburtons of today was the same Warburtons their parents bought. But it's not. It's not even close. The bread you're eating now bears the same name, the same logo, the same colors. But the formula, the ingredients, the entire nature of the product has fundamentally changed. And they're banking on the fact that you won't notice, that you'll keep buying it out of habit, out of trust, out of the belief that something this popular, this British, this familiar couldn't possibly be problematic. But it is. Because when the most popular bread in the country is this heavily processed, this dependent on industrial oils and chemical enhancers, what does that say about the state of British food? What does it say about what we've been conditioned to accept as normal? Kingsmill, the second most popular bread brand in Britain, another household name, another loaf millions of families buy every single week without thinking twice. Kingsmill Great White, the medium-sliced version that's become a staple in kitchens from Cornwall to Scotland. Kingsmill markets itself as great bread. It's right there in the name. Great White, great every day, great taste. They've built their entire identity around the promise of greatness, of quality, of being better than the budget alternatives while still being affordable for regular families. They position themselves as the sensible choice. Not too cheap that it feels dodgy, not too expensive that it feels pretentious. Just right. Just great. The Goldilocks of British bread. And for years, people believed it. Believed that buying Kingsmill meant buying quality, meant feeding their family something worthwhile. But look at the back of the packet. Look at what actually goes into Kingsmill Great White. And suddenly that word great starts feeling less like a promise and more like a marketing slogan designed to distract you from what's really happening. The ingredient list reads like a chemical factory. Wheat flour with added calcium carbonate, iron, niacin, thiamine, water, yeast, so far recognizable. Then it spirals. Rapeseed oil. There it is again, the seed oil that shouldn't be in bread. Salt. Preservative calcium propionate to keep it lasting far longer than any natural bread would. Emulsifiers E471 and E472E. Flour treatment agent ascorbic acid. This is industrial bread. Bread designed in laboratories, tested for maximum shelf life, optimized for transport logistics, engineered for profit rather than nourishment. And yet it's called Great White, as if there's something naturally superior about it. As if the whiteness, the softness, the perfect uniformity of every slice is a sign of quality rather than a sign of how heavily it's been processed. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about white bread. Real white bread, the kind made in traditional bakeries, doesn't look like this, doesn't feel like this, doesn't last like this. Real white bread has texture. It has irregularities. It goes stale quickly because it's alive, because it's real food that responds to air and time like real food should. But Kingsmill Great White stays soft for days, sometimes a week, longer if you keep it sealed. The texture never changes, the taste never develops. It remains exactly the same from the moment you open the bag until the moment you finish the loaf. And people think that's quality, think that's freshness, think that's what bread is supposed to be like. But it's not. It's what bread becomes when you pump it full of preservatives, stabilizers, and emulsifiers. When you engineer it to survive distribution networks, warehouse storage, and extended shelf time. When you prioritize longevity over life. And the worst part? Kingsmill used to make better bread. Go back to their original recipes, their founding principles, and you'll find a company that actually cared about baking. That understood bread was meant to be simple. That knew you didn't need 20 ingredients to make a decent loaf, but that version of Kingsmill doesn't exist anymore. What remains is a brand name, a recognizable logo, and a product that's been fundamentally altered to meet the demands of modern mass production. And because it's the second most popular bread in Britain, because it's in millions of homes, because it's been normalized for so long, nobody questions it. We just keep buying it, keep eating it, keep feeding it to our children, believing that popularity equals safety, that market dominance means it must be fine. But it's not fine. It's a heavily processed industrial product masquerading as traditional British bread. Hovis, another pillar of British bread culture. Another name that feels like it's been part of this country forever. The brand with the nostalgic advertising, the heartwarming imagery, the emotional connection to British history and heritage. The brand that convinced generations of people it represented tradition, quality, craftsmanship. But Hovis Medium White, one of their best-selling products, tells a very different story. A story about how even the most trusted brands, the ones built on legacy and reputation, have quietly abandoned the very principles they claim to uphold. Hovis runs advertisements showing cobbled streets, old-fashioned bakeries, scenes from Britain's past. They market themselves as keepers of tradition, as guardians of proper bread, as the brand your grandparents would recognize and approve of. They wrap themselves in heritage like it's armor against criticism. But the Hovis Medium White Loaf, sitting on supermarket shelves today, has almost nothing in common with the bread that built their reputation. Look at the ingredients. Wheat flour fortified with calcium carbonate, iron, niacin, thiamine, water, yeast. Then the modern additions begin. Vegetable oils including rapeseed oil and palm oil, both cheap industrial oils used to extend shelf life and reduce costs. Salt, wheat protein, preservative calcium propionate, emulsifiers E472E and E471, flour treatment agent ascorbic acid. This isn't heritage bread, this isn't traditional British baking, this is mass-market industrial production disguised in nostalgic packaging. They're selling you a feeling, a memory, an emotion. But the product itself? That's been gutted, re-engineered, and rebuilt to prioritize everything except what actually made Hovis respected in the first place. And they know exactly what they're doing. They know that people trust the Hovis name, that families who grew up with Hovis will continue buying Hovis without checking the ingredients, that the emotional connection is strong enough to override rational analysis. So they keep the branding, keep the messaging, keep the warm fuzzy feelings, while quietly changing what's actually in the bag. Because the truth is, Hovis Medium White is just another ultra-processed loaf. Just another example of how far British bread has fallen. Just another product that prioritizes industrial efficiency over nutritional value. And the fact that it comes from a brand synonymous with British baking heritage makes it even more disappointing. This is the brand that was supposed to represent quality. That was supposed to maintain standards. That was supposed to resist the race to the bottom that's consumed the entire industry. But they didn't resist. They joined in. They compromised. They chose profit margins and market share over the principles their entire reputation was built on. And now, millions of British people buy Hovis thinking they're choosing quality. Thinking they're supporting a traditional brand. Thinking they're feeding their families something wholesome and British. When in reality, they're buying the exact same type of industrially engineered, chemically enhanced, artificially preserved product that dominates the entire market. The name Hovis still means something to people. But the bread itself? That's been hollowed out and replaced with something entirely different. But here's what really reveals the state of British bread. The store brands. Tesco Everyday Value. Asda Smart Price, Sainsbury's Basics, Morrison's Savers. The budget loaves that millions of families rely on because they can't afford anything else. These aren't brands in the traditional sense. They're products, commodities, the absolute bottom of the market where price is the only factor that matters, where quality, ingredients, nutrition are all sacrificed at the altar of affordability. And the truly disturbing part is that for many British families, these aren't occasional purchases. They're not emergency backup options. They're the daily bread, the only bread. The bread that children grow up eating every single day because their parents are trying to stretch every pound as far as it will go. Walk into any supermarket and you'll find them. The cheapest white bread on the shelf, usually around 40 to 50 pence per loaf. Sometimes less during promotions. Sliced, bagged, wrapped in the plainest packaging possible. No fancy branding, no heritage claims, no emotional appeals. Just bread, or what they're calling bread, because these store-brand loaves represent the absolute minimum. The lowest possible cost, the highest possible profit margin, the least amount of real ingredients corporations can get away with while still legally calling it bread. The ingredient lists are virtually identical to the premium brands. Same seed oils, same emulsifiers, same preservatives, same chemical treatment agents. The only difference is quality control might be slightly lower, the flour might be slightly cheaper, the process might be slightly more rushed. But fundamentally, it's the same industrial product with a different label and a lower price. And that reveals the horrifying truth about the British bread market. The expensive brands and the budget brands are essentially the same thing. The same ultra-processed, chemically enhanced, industrially optimized product. The only difference is the marketing budget and the profit margin. You're not paying extra for better ingredients when you buy Warburton's instead of Tesco value. You're paying for the brand name, for the advertising, for the image. The actual bread, it's the same industrial formula with minor variations. And this is what Britain has become. A country where even the most basic staple food, something humans have been making for thousands of years with 4 simple ingredients, has been so thoroughly industrialized, so completely corporatized, so fundamentally altered that there's barely any difference between the premium version and the economy version. Because they're all made the same way, in the same massive factories, using the same chemical shortcuts, following the same profit-driven playbook. The store brands are honest in a way the premium brands aren't. They don't pretend to be heritage products. They don't wrap themselves in nostalgia. They don't make emotional appeals about British tradition. They just are what they are. Cheap industrial bread for people who can't afford anything else. And millions of British families eat this every single day. Not by choice, but by necessity. Because real bread, proper bread, bread made with actual ingredients by actual bakers, has become a luxury item. Something you buy from artisan bakeries in wealthy neighbourhoods. Something that costs £3, £4, £5 per loaf. Something completely out of reach for ordinary working families. So they buy the store brand, feed it to their children, pack it in lunchboxes, make toast every morning, and never realize that the bread they're eating is barely recognizable as food. And here's the part nobody wants to acknowledge. This isn't getting better, it's getting worse. Every year, the ingredient lists get longer. Every year, more processing aids get added. Every year, real bread becomes rarer and industrial substitutes become more dominant. Because the corporations have won. They've successfully replaced real bread with engineered products. They've trained entire generations to prefer soft, white, uniform, long-lasting bread over anything real. They've made traditional baking seem quaint, old-fashioned, impractical. And they've done it so gradually, so quietly, so cunningly that most people haven't even noticed. The bread in your kitchen now looks like the bread that was there 20 years ago. Same shape, same color, same packaging, but the ingredients, the processing, the fundamental nature of the product, completely different. Your grandparents ate bread made with 4 ingredients. You're eating bread made with 15, 20, sometimes more. Your grandparents' bread went stale after a day because it was alive. Your bread lasts a week because it's so heavily preserved and stabilized that even bacteria struggle to break it down. And that should terrify you. When your food is so processed, so chemical, so unnatural that even microorganisms don't want to eat it, what does that say about what it's doing inside your body? The most popular breads in Britain, the ones in millions of homes right now, the ones that dominate supermarket shelves and command massive market shares, aren't actually bread anymore. They're industrial products, engineered foods, laboratory creations. Things that happen to be shaped like bread and marketed as bread, but bear almost no resemblance to what bread actually is. And the real tragedy is that most British people have never tasted real bread. They've grown up on this industrial substitute. They think soft, white, long-lasting is what bread is supposed to be. They don't know any different. They don't realize what they're missing. There was a time when every town had real bakeries, when bread was baked fresh every morning, when you could smell it as you walked past, when it had crust that crackled and crumb that had texture and flavor that actually tasted like grain rather than nothing. That Britain is gone. Those bakeries have closed, that bread has disappeared. And what's replaced it is this: industrial uniformity, chemical enhancement, processed substitutes. And the saddest part is that most people don't even mourn what's been lost because they never knew it existed. They've been raised on Warburtons and Kingsmill and Hovis Medium White. They think this is bread. This is all bread has ever been. This is all bread will ever be. But it's not. Real bread still exists. It's just rare, expensive, inaccessible to most families, while the industrial substitutes grow cheaper and more dominant every year.